Thanks for coming out. My name's Darren Koningen. I'm the CEO of the company. I'm trying to fill in for Doug Ramshaw today. So for those of you who know Doug, it's his slide deck, so I apologize a little bit if I stumble through some of this. But I guess, you know, why Minera Alamos? Why does anybody care? You know, we've taken, I think, a little bit different approach to a number of the groups that you've been seeing today. The strength of the company is really an in-house engineering and operations group that's now been together in Mexico for over a decade. And so when we sat down and put the current form of the company together a couple of years ago, the plan was to put a portfolio of late-stage assets together. And by the target for those assets were projects that had maybe plus or minus 500,000 ounces already defined, that we felt with our group we could get up and into production quickly for a fairly low capex number, but that they also had enough critical mass around them that they could be expanded later. And the idea was we'd put a number of these together, we'd get them up and running quickly, and then we'd use the cash flow inside the company to expand the resource base for the company as a whole. And as the resource base expanded, then obviously we can bring the production profile up for the company as well. We have now two projects that are just finishing the permitting phase in Mexico and are ready to go into construction. And then we're continuing to look for other pieces that will fit in the pipeline after that. And I'd be remiss to not point out the involvement of Osisko Gold Royalties that got involved 2 years ago when we started to pitch this. They bought into it and became not only an equity partner, but also put together an arrangement with us whereby we could draw on royalty funds out of their business to use for construction in our business. The company profile is a little snapshot is here. Basically, the shares are held about 50-50 between some institutional groups and management and a retail base. We have a little over $4 million in cash in the company, which is all we need to get through into the production at Santana next year. And I guess the biggest thing that's happened in the last few months is we had a number of legacy warrants in the company, big blocks of warrants that have now been exercised. And there's one small block left at the end of this month, and then we'll be clean from that point on. So we've had lots of trading volume lately, and we're starting to see some success in that regard. I won't go through all of this. The management, basically, Doug Ramshaw was president of Corex Gold that we acquired last year. He stayed on with the company along with myself and Chris Chatter, who I've worked with for a number of years in Mexico. The senior management group in Mexico is the same group that's now been together for over a decade. And then on the board we have Ruben Padilla, who's one of the three key technical advisors for the Osisko group of companies. Bruce Durham, who's a well-known geologist here in the Toronto area, and Chester Miller, for those who don't know, who was founder of Alamos, Alamos Gold, Glamis, El Dorado, and Chester and I worked together in putting Castle Gold together, which was sort of the genesis of Minera Alamos plan. Here's a slightly different way of looking at it. Basically, all we're trying to do here is to point out is that the projects that we're talking about developing are very low capex and well within the size of the company, our market cap of the company that we currently have. There's a bit of history here related to the El Castillo project, which we developed for Castle Gold and which then became Argonaut Gold. That project was very similar to the sort of target projects we're looking at here. We had 300,000 to 400,000 ounces when we started there, got it up and running, and then we're in the process of expanding it to 75,000 to 80,000 ounces a year, plus drilling off the resources once we were up and running, when Argonaut stepped in a couple of years later and bought the business out. What we're talking about doing this time is each of the targets is in this range, but we've now got a number of them and we've got a much bigger financial backer than we did when we started at Castle Gold. As far as the projects themselves, I won't spend too much time here, but for those who know, we're in the northwest part of Mexico. The flagship asset, the one that we're trying to get up and running first, is Santana, which is in the southern part of Sonora. We ran a 50,000-ton bulk heap leach test that ended last year with very, very good results, and then immediately applied for permits for the project. 2 weeks ago, we made the land use payment, so we've changed it now for mining use, and we're just waiting for the last of the permit documents to follow that. So we should be in a position to start construction here late this year, and we will then be loading material next summer. The La Fortuna Project, we also got permits in late last year. This is the one of the projects we've been looking at that's not a heap leach project. It has a little higher capex in the 25 to 30 million range, but as you can see, less than 1 year payback on the starter pit, which was the basis of the PEA that was put together last year. The plan here is to start construction work on this as soon as we're up and running in Santana, and there's an initial target here of about 50,000 ounces a year to start as well. And then Guadalupe we'll come back to later. There's some other assets we're looking at, but Guadalupe we've recently joint ventured, and the main reason for that being that we've seen tremendous upside in Santana that we may not have been expecting so soon. And so we're putting plans together to do a big expansion at Santana. And in the meantime, we'll be scrambling the next year or two to do that. We don't really have the time to put into Guadalupe, so we will stay a significant partner in this JV arrangement, and a couple of years from now we can certainly talk about maybe putting it back together with the company. The Santana Project is located just off the highway about 3 hours south of the capital city in Sonora. It's a good location. As I mentioned, we finished a very successful large bulk test last year. And there's lots of exploration upside in this area. This is an area that had typically lots of small historic mines, but nobody's been able to put the whole package together. Here's a picture of our cheap and dirty heap leach we built for the bulk test. The key takeaways from this were just that the recoveries overall weren't that size dependent for the material that we have here. And we recovered close to 0.7 of a gram of gold. The head grades in this area were anticipated to be in around the 0.8, maybe a little bit beyond 0.8 gram range. Here's a little 3D view of sort of what we put together for the permits that we'll have in the next couple months. This is our starter leach pad, and the idea is to feed just the Nicho zone, which I'll show you on a map initially. We're now looking at a much bigger facility for down the road, as it looks like we're going to have a number of feeder mines, and we're going to need an area much bigger than this. So this will be a good starting area to get going, and now we're looking for a much bigger site. The overall project is shown here. It's a little hard to see, but over in the Nicho area in the west, there's a small red circle. That's the actual pit, the current pit of the area that was drilled. And that's the basis of the permit and the plan that's been put in place. What we've discovered in this area is that there's 8 to 10 very high quality surface targets. These are all breccia pipes that come right to surface in the area. You can actually, now that you know what you're looking for, you can actually see them at surface. They're anywhere from a few hundred meters to close to a kilometer in size. And what that means practically ounce-wise is something on the order on the small end of 50,000 ounces to close to half a million ounces each. And the issue in this area historically has been that people have found these, but they were drilling for deep, large porphyries below. I don't think those exist, but what does exist is a good half dozen plus zones already now that can be in the range of 50 to 100,000 to half a million each. So as we've understood the geology here, we've gotten more and more excited about the plans for this, and we're starting to put a much larger plan in place where we'll have a central leaching facility and bring material from a number of pits around the area. The mineralization is all in general just south of a gram. It comes right out at surface, so low strips, typically 1 to 2 to 1 at the most right now. And then obviously continues at depth, and we haven't drilled any of the deep material. So we have a program in place now to start to expand this out, but the permit is to start right in that Nicho area on the west. The La Fortuna Project, which is the second one that we received permit notices for late last year, is these have a similar target size. This is a big historic mining area. It's only a couple hours drive now from Culiacan. One time was quite remote, used to take 6 or 7 hours to get out there. So it's an opportunity to get into an area that was shut down in the early 1900s and now is starting to open up. This gives you an idea of the one starter pit, which was the basis of the PEA for this project. I'll show you the map, the bigger map later, but this is very high grade material. The bulk of it's 3.5 to 4 grams. It's At surface, it even right now, without the drilling the extensions to the west, finishes at about a 6 to 7 to 1 strip. But it's largely free gold. Most of it's gravity recoverable. And we actually acquired a used processing plant about a year and a half ago, which had the capabilities to process up to 2,000 tons a day of material. And so that plant, the plan is for that to be moved to this site. And right at the moment, it looks like that'll be later next year once Santana's up and running. Some numbers from the PA. The thing just to keep in mind here is this is just based on the original starter pit, the only piece of this project that's been drilled. Very high returns, very low costs, and quick paybacks. The more interesting thing in this project is that mine is located in the center there in the Fortuna extensions area. There were 4 historic mining areas around this project. All these little gold dots are old mining pits and adits, and nobody's done any drilling on the rest of this project. So we're looking once again to get up and started here. We've got capacity to expand the plant. We're talking about starting at 1,000 tons a day, and then we can expand out as we grow resources around the site here. I won't get too much into this Guadalupe other than just to say, as I mentioned before, our priorities are a little fluid as Santana is showing the scale that we think exists there now. Our focus on Guadalupe has fallen a little bit behind, so we did do a transaction with a group that's going to try and advance it with our help over the next year or two, and then we can always get back to talking about what happens here next. You know, and at the end of the day, as I mentioned, this is changing as we go, but the idea was to have a portfolio of these assets we could get up and running with multiple assets that brings you quite quickly to a target of you know, around 150,000 ounces a year plus, but then have the ability to expand significantly beyond that as the resources grow at each project. Right now, the Santana and La Fortuna are the focus. Both are essentially finished permitting. The Santana expansion then would be the next piece. And then we are looking for additional assets. We've had some advanced discussions in that respect recently, actually. This is also some stuff from Cormark, but although this is changing and fluid, you start to see what we're trying to do and how the company can grow quite quickly. We're talking about, in total, to do this plan as we have about $50 million, $50 to $60 million, and we have a significant part of that agreed to already with a Cisco, and we can tie that on with some future cash flows and a little bit of debt we've been discussing. So we're not talking about equity raises here.